induction from Speak with IT last week, I think, in person. And from my understanding of that, that kind of covered some information about the organisation, and some background about stroke and aphasia, and also a sort of introduction to the apps that you're going to be using with people with aphasia. So this session, as you'll know already, is around supported conversation. And I'm slightly anxious because I changed the heading of that slide and it hasn't come up, and I'm thinking, I hope this is the right version. But anyway, we'll see how we go. So yeah, Speak with IT has a primary focus on supporting people to self-manage and their aphasia with the use of therapy apps. But it's become apparent kind of in the life of the charity that the reason that people are using therapy apps is because they want to improve their language, and their language is important to them because of being able to participate in conversation and social interactions, and that's so important for all of us in terms of our participation and our well-being. So it just doesn't really make sense just to focus on working with therapy apps without thinking about the kind of wider context in which you're working, and that you're bound to be wanting to have conversations, and the person with aphasia is going to want to get to know you and you get to know them, and that conversation can be really challenging because of aphasia. So it's really helpful if you have, in addition to skills and understanding about stroke and aphasia, and in addition to skills with and familiarity with therapy apps, if you have some tools to support people's conversation. So that's really the purpose of the training this morning, to kind of skill you up a little bit to be able to support conversation with people with aphasia. This slide is to remind me to do introductions and find out people's path here. So we've done that. So really this is what I want to cover in the next couple of hours. Just a really quick refresher about aphasia so that we're all on the same page, and then primarily to think about how people with aphasia communicate and how you might communicate with someone with aphasia. So that's the plan. We're at 10:15 now, and we're due to finish at 12. I'm proposing that we just crack on through, really, if that's all right with everybody, but we might have just a really brief kind of stretch your legs, go and get a quick cup of coffee, 5 minutes, at about 11, if that would be welcome. What do you think? I can see 2 people nodding, and I can see myself. I'm going to hide self-view so I get more people on my screen. Okay, great, we'll do that. So, can anyone offer a kind of a reminder to the group of the difference between speech and language? Because I think this is sometimes it's not kind of well understood, but I think if you have this very clear in your head, that really helps you as you start this volunteering placement. So would anyone like to just shout up and tell us about their understanding of the difference between speech and language? Sorry, there's a printer going in the background here. It'll stop in a moment. I can see Paranat on my screen, so I'm going to pick on you. Sorry, Paranat.
It's all right. So I think the difference is like speech is more like the sound, or like for example, people with dysarthria would be people who have problem with their speech. So the sound, the voice, something like that. But the problem with language is it's like the process of, for example, the vocabulary, they can't think of the words, or they don't understand what other people say, something like that. The language problem.
Thank you, Paranat. That's great. Yeah. So very speech therapy answer, because you focus straight in on speech problems and language problems. So that's absolutely fine. So yeah, absolutely, as Paranat said, when we're thinking about people's speech, we're thinking about the actual physical motor act of talking. And then obviously how that can be affected when somebody's had a stroke or got other sort of difficulties that mean they've got a speech problem. So people's speech can be slow, or their voice can be affected, or it can be unclear. So that's all to do with just the physical act of talking. And when we think about language, we're thinking about these modalities. So all of us have these 4 modalities of our language, and luckily and happily for us, our language is all intact in these 4 modalities. So you can all understand what I'm saying to you and process the spoken word. And there's a big picture of an ear there, but it's not so much hearing that I'm thinking about. Oh, Anna, you've put your hand up.
Yeah, sorry, I don't think the slides are changing for us.
Oh, I wondered whether you were saying that.
Sorry.
That's why I thought better stop.
Thanks.
Isn't that frustrating? Let me just stop sharing and restart again and see if there's something that I can do about that. Thanks, Anna. Let's just try it this way. Can you see 4 blocks of, and let me just, if I go forward, no, it's not changing for me either. It's great when it works, isn't it? Is that changing for you now?
Yeah, that's changed.
Great, fabulous. Okay. Might need to use my mouse for some reason, but that's absolutely fine. So we were talking about these 4 modalities of language, and I was saying to you that although there's a big picture of an ear on this slide, it isn't really, I'm not really thinking about people's hearing at this point. I'm thinking about once they've heard something, once they've heard a sentence or a speech, or whatever, their ability to process what's been said. So that's intact for all of us. We can process the spoken word, and we can also process the written word, can't we? So we can all read. And then, so on the left-hand side of this is our 2 ways of getting words in, if you like. We either hear them and process them, or we read them and process them. And then on the right-hand side is our 2 ways of getting words out. So we either retrieve words to use them verbally in conversation, or we retrieve them to write them, and that might be writing by pen and paper, or texting, or typing, or whatever whatever we choose to use. But those are our ways of getting language out. And as Paranat helpfully said, those are the things that are affected when language is affected by a stroke or aphasia or other brain injury. So that's aphasia is a language impairment, and it affects one or all or some of all of these modalities. Okay. So what I'd really like us to spend just a few minutes just thinking about these modalities, and just thinking about how you've used either spoken comprehension or written comprehension, or how you've used your ability to retrieve words and construct sentences, so your spoken expression, or how you've used writing, texting, typing this morning before you've reached 10 o'clock and come to this session. So I'm just going to give everybody a minute to just reflect, and then I'm going to just ask everyone to just give one quick example of what you've done that's used your intact language skills this morning. Does that make sense? Lovely, thank you. Okay, so shall we have both Annas first? Anna W. What if can you think of one quick example?
So I went and got a coffee this morning, so I guess ordering the coffee would be my spoken expression, as well as spoken comprehension for what they're saying. I guess that's a bit simple, but
no, but it's
it works.
really helpful. Thank you, Anna. No, that's a perfect example. Yeah, great. Anna D?
Yeah, so like opening a text and replying this morning. So obviously that's like written comprehension to read it, and then writing the response is obviously then like a form of written expression, not like handwriting, but typing is still, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, great. Thank you, Anna. Yeah, these are great examples. Catherine?
For mine, I was thinking for written comprehension, filtering through all my emails to find the one to get into this meeting.
That's a lovely example and quite a task, isn't it? And actually, I think thank you for that, because even something that you can kind of smile about and say, it doesn't seem like that big an ask. Actually, you'll have had to do quite a lot of processing of the written word, won't you, to filter through that. And you'll have had several emails from James, presumably, and finding the right one. So there's quite a lot of processing of the written word around that. Yeah, thank you. Paranat?
So I was watching Netflix this morning. That would be my spoken comprehension. And I was also reading subtitle. That would be my written comprehension.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah. So two lots of processing, spoken word and written word. Yeah. Lucy?
I spoke to my mum on the phone this morning, so it'll be spoken expression and then spoken comprehension.
Yes, lovely. Thank you. That's great. And we haven't had you, Rachel, have we? I'm sorry, I'm struggling because I can't see people's faces.
Okay, I looked at the recipe for making bread this morning, so that was reading. I also thanked my husband for making it tea.
Great. Lovely. Yeah. So I know it sounds a bit of an obvious exercise, isn't it? But I just think it's really helpful for us to sort of reflect on. We're so dependent, aren't we, on our language? So that's what I'm after doing here, is just reflecting on how much we use our intact language on a day-to-day basis, and thinking about, well, what does that mean then in terms of the emotional and psychological impact for the people that you're going to be getting to know with stroke and aphasia. So any thoughts about how it might be to have these sorts of language impairments that we're just starting to understand?
I would say frustrating and fatiguing.
Thank you. Yeah, two good words: frustrating and fatiguing. Very tiring to be having very effortful communication. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
Well, it means you might be unable to participate in things that you've previously enjoyed, so like conversation with family, but also unable to enjoy things like television and radio, books, which can have a massive effect on happiness.
Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and really, really big impact on well-being and on identity, really, because it's in our kind of yeah. Well, we'll talk more about that. Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. Any other quick thoughts from anybody? That's fine. Yeah, so really significant emotional and psychological impacts in terms of identity, in terms of how effortful, simple things like the examples that you've given, ordering a cup of coffee, having a conversation, looking up a recipe. And so I think that's the kind of frame that I'd like us to have this morning, as we start to think about supported conversation. That understanding of the really significant impact of aphasia, and what small things we might be able to do to lessen that impact. Okay, so this is where we've got to, I think. So I want to spend the rest of our time this morning really focusing on supported conversation and how people with aphasia communicate and how we might support that. So I'm just going to let you read this. This is a quote from Aura Kagan, who's a Canadian speech and language therapist. So I really like this quote because, again, I think it reframes supported conversation slightly differently around revealing competence as a sort of overarching sort of principle around supported conversation. So yes, you're involved in helping people have a meaningful, enjoyable conversation, but also it's about well-being and identity and revealing that they're competent, that language problems aren't, language is a cognitive skill, but people aren't stupid. They've just got language difficulties. Okay, do just shout up if you've got any comments or questions. So the supported conversation and these sorts of this sort of training and I've got word finding difficulties myself. But there are conversation partner schemes up and down the country, and with Speak with IT you're involved in something slightly different because there's also the focus on self-management with apps. But in Sheffield and across the country there are a number of schemes where we train students and volunteers to provide supported conversation. And the key principles underlying that are that there's something intrinsically valuable about conversation. And that's what distinguishes us as humans, isn't it? And that there is something therapeutic about skilled supported conversation. So you're not offering speech therapy, and it is a different thing to the therapy that you're offering via apps, but there is something still that's therapeutic about having a well-supported conversation. And then often it's not rocket science. So it just involves use of very simple tools to communicate. Across these conversation partner schemes and the sorts of work that Speak with IT is doing varies across the UK and internationally. But one of the features is that there is ongoing support. So you're not on your own with this. And you can come back to Speak with IT, both to James and to the other members of that team with any sort of questions or concerns that you've got, and there are resources available from Speak with IT which we'll come to as well. So this is an analogy that you may find helpful, or you can take it or leave it really. So we sometimes think about how we might provide a ramp for a conversation in the same way as you might make a building physically accessible for a wheelchair user. That involves these four things really. So the environment and the context, and then the skills of the person with the communication difficulty, so how you're going to use their more intact skills, and then your own skills as a communication partner, and then resources to support conversation. So we're going to unpack those four things next, if that's all right. And these are kind of obvious things, but I think they're just worth saying, aren't they? That it's really important that you can see each other. So make sure that there's good light, that you're, I know quite a lot of your interaction is going to happen on Zoom for Speak with IT, although not exclusively. I think some of you might be doing face-to-face work. And so I guess there's a different set of environmental considerations, around the tech working and the volume working and those sorts of things. But reducing distractions, reducing background noise, not. This is more the case in a group context, but speaking one at a time and those sorts of things. So environment changes that you can make that make significant differences to sort of how easy or otherwise it is to have a conversation. So bear those things in mind. That's just some pointers around environment and context. Oh, I want people to generate some of these thoughts actually. So let me just take this forward. Yeah, what changes can you make to your own communication to support conversation? I want us to sort of generate these ideas together, and that's really because I want to demonstrate to you that you do know these things. So I think if we do a bit of a go round and just suggest different changes that you can make to your own communication that will make it easier for someone with aphasia to understand you. So, sorry, let me just get some paper so I can keep track of what people are saying. Oh, sorry folks, bear with me, I've got no scrap paper. Great, okay. Rachel, can I pick on you, please?
Yes. Well, I thought about just using short phrases and sentences with just one piece of information at a time.
Lovely, thank you, yeah. So just reducing the sort of complexity. Oh, Anna, you've appeared, how lovely. Oh, since you're there, any thoughts that you've got?
So I suppose the rate that you're speaking at, you could sort of try and slow down a little bit, just so you make sure that they're hearing everything you're saying and you're giving them time to process.
Lovely, yeah, I think that's really helpful and harder to do than I'm just trying to do it deliberately now. So just slowing down a little bit, creating a few more pauses so that there's just generally a bit more space and a bit more processing time without, I hope, being patronising. And that's a bit of a balance to get, isn't it? But yeah, really thank you, Anna, for bringing that up, because I think that's a really helpful one. It does really make a difference. And if any, some of you who may well be multilingual will know when you're operating in a second language and where your language skills aren't quite as intact as in your first language. It just really helps if people slow down. And you kind of really enjoy those speakers who are a bit slower, because it just, gives you a bit more space, doesn't it? So that's very much the experience of people with aphasia. It just really helps if we all just take the boiler off. Great. I've already lost track. Rachel and Anna. Lucy.
I was thinking maybe like using gestures to accompany what you're saying, just like add clarification and to help guide them a bit more.
Yeah, thank you, Lucy. Yeah, I think that's really helpful. And we're just thinking about sort of naturally occurring gesture, really. I haven't turned my camera off, but I can't see myself, so I don't know if you can see me. But I might say to somebody, "Oh, I've only got 5 more minutes," and tap at my watch, or "Should we have a cup of tea? Do you need a tea break?" So just those additional things. We're not talking about signing or anything like that, but just naturally occurring gesture, just add something else in. Lovely, Lucy, thank you. Anna D.
Maybe having a piece of paper so you can write certain things down so that they can kind of see it while you're saying it and they're hearing it.
Lovely. you'll see why I'm smiling a little bit at that point, but that's because it'll become clear with some slides later on. But yeah, absolutely, that can be a really helpful thing. Yeah, and yeah, and then you're kind of getting it twice, aren't you? You're hearing it and you're seeing it, and so you're kind of doubling people's chances. Yeah, lovely, thank you. Parana.
I mean, your intonation maybe can help people understand you more. Your tone, your or other nonverbal you know.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So, I mean, we've talked about sort of non-verbals in relation to gesture, and I guess I'm just thinking about intonation. I'm sure that does help in terms of marking questions or kind of, yes, giving kind of extra information about whether something's funny or surprising or annoying. So, yes, we're all picking up on a lot of that, aren't we? Yeah, thank you, Paramount. Catherine.
For me personally, I have a tendency to start mumbling, especially the longer I try to speak. So a nice clear voice and a nice level volume throughout would be the most helpful thing I could do.
Great, thank you. Yeah. So yes, just being conscious again, just as we were saying with being slow, being conscious of being clear as well. I think that's really helpful. Yeah, and then I like that level volume. Thank you. Because you want to be conscious of not being too quiet and also of not shouting at people. So yeah, that's all helpful. Does anyone want to add anything else in that they've thought of as they've listened to other people's contributions? Great, thank you. So what I've done here is I've just put a few, a couple of slides with some suggestions of the sorts of things that we've covered, and quite a number of them I think we've already discussed. I'm going to have to just move your faces for a moment so I can see my whole slide. Yeah. So we've talked about writing down keywords and not rushing, slowing down. We've talked about simplifying so that you're saying kind of one key thing at a time. So a few other things that didn't crop up but that I think are really helpful. Recapping. So I use this a lot. Oh, I'm noticing that some people are taking notes, and that's great. And I always take notes because it really helps me concentrate and process what's being said. But I will make sure that you have copies of these slides so that you don't have to get all the content down. Sorry, I should have said that sooner. So yeah, recapping. I just quite often they're an inevitable communication breakdowns when you're talking with people with aphasia. And I think it can really help to kind of to recap and go back and say, right, hang on a minute. You've told me that you went to Meadowhall and that you went with your daughter, but I don't know what you did after that, or I don't know where you went for lunch, or whatever, the bit that you've got stuck on is, so that you're marking. These are the bits that I've understood, and then everyone's on the same page. So I think recapping is a really good skill. And then not pretending that you've understood if you haven't. That's bound to go wrong. So rather than kind of sort of, I think this is a real balancing act, because sometimes you need to kind of go with it, even if you're not completely understanding, thinking that, right, okay, this might get clearer if we just follow through with the conversation for a bit longer. But then if you're not understanding, it's always best to be honest and just say, oh, I'm really sorry, I'm not getting this, and then maybe use that recapping strategy, or refer back to the written words that you've put down, or use another strategy. But being honest that you've not understood, I think is really valuable. I think we've covered other things on there. Okay. And then this slide kind of says many of the same things, but I think it's refrain slightly differently is also useful. So I'll let you just have a quick look at it. Okay. You'll have access to that again, so I'll move on. So I put this slide in because I just think, just to take us back to that Aura Kagan quote about revealing competence via supported conversation, I think it's a really helpful short phrase, which I use quite often. When I'm talking with people with aphasia and they're struggling with something that they're trying to say or tell me, it can be really useful as a shorthand to acknowledge people's competence by saying, I know you know. So I just find that a useful kind of stock phrase almost that I offer you. Okay. So I want to spend a bit of, in fact, quite a chunk of time with the rest of the session this morning, thinking about the resources that we might use to support conversation, to support the exchange of messages. And again, what I want to do with this is to reflect together. And I think we might have several go-rounds of this because there's all sorts of things that you can be doing. So to reflect together on what resources you might use to support conversation. Okay, so Catherine, you're at the top of my screen, sorry.
It's fine. I think mostly what could be really useful is pen and paper, very simple, but could be useful for many different things. You could draw or you could write, keywords, things like that.
Yeah, thank you. So pen and paper is really key. Now, obviously, that's really challenging on Zoom. And that's not a criticism, Catherine, sorry, not at all. I think you're absolutely right to say it first. But it's such a useful supported conversation tool, and it is really, really challenging to kind of achieve the same thing. So, sometimes I've sort of shared my screen and written things down, either just a Word document or using kind of other, notes or other things that. So I think that's a sort of challenge to address when you've met your particular conversation partner or the person that you're going to be working with in Speak with IT, and then working out what they need and whether there are any kind of go-rounds that are going to work for them. But yes, so just bear in mind that having some sort of something shared visually that you can both look at, but obviously much harder to kind of both annotate when you're on Zoom. Not impossible, but just more technically challenging when tech can be a challenge anyway. Yeah. And I suppose it's really worth flagging up that it's rare actually. The pen and paper is much more often for you as the conversation partner, as the person doing more of the supporting. It's much more useful to you. Sometimes people with aphasia will take the pen and paper off me and write the first few letters of a word or a keyword or draw me something, and that's all really helpful. But often the support is around you writing or drawing something that is just going to make conversation a bit easier, or pin things down for the person with aphasia. Yeah, great. Okay. Any other thoughts? I can see both Annas. So Anna D.
Yeah, on the same kind of thought, and if you were saying, say if it was online, you could use maybe like Google search for like images
Yeah.
to kind of help.
Yeah, absolutely. Access to the internet and shared access to the internet is really, really helpful. And yeah, I use that a lot, and I think that's a really good idea. And some of that might be that you would do some homework in between sessions, and if something had cropped up about, who knows, I'm trying to think of a recent example that I've had. Yeah, somebody went to a local pub for their wedding anniversary, and I looked up some stuff about the pub and the menus, and had the pub website ready so that we could kind of have a bit of a conversation about where it was, what they'd eaten, and those sorts of things. And you could do that at the time, or you could do some looking up in advance about whatever their hobbies and interests. But yeah, the internet's a fantastic resource. And absolutely make use of it. And obviously, if you're sharing a screen, that almost, Anna, as you've said, makes that side of things a bit easier, doesn't it? Because you can look at the same thing. I'm always encouraging people when they're visiting face to face not to rely on the shared phone screen, because it's just often too small. So a tablet or a laptop is often just much easier. So that's an advantage of your kind of online work, that you can share screen. Yeah, lovely. Thank you, Anna. Lucy?
I'm not entirely sure, but I was thinking like maybe something to do at the start of the session just to like ease into the conversation rather than like going straight into using the therapy apps. Maybe just like talking about what's been happening in the news or something, and you could look at like, there was, I can't remember what it was called, but we did it in the training day, and it was like the top news stories or something. We could use that to like introduce the conversation.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Lucy. It's called Words of the Week. Slightly counterintuitively, given what it is, but yes, you're right. Yeah, so some speech and language therapists in Scotland, on the east coast of Scotland, produce that weekly, and you can access that via Speak with IT. And it is it's a very kind of accessible, aphasia friendly way into the week's news. Actually, I can share that now since it's come up, because I've got this week's. Did you see one, Lucy, last week?
Yeah, I think it was from last week. Yeah, that we saw it.
Yeah. So is everyone familiar with that? Perhaps I don't need to share it. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, so I think that's a really good resource. It's just really helpful. And if people are interested in current affairs, that might be, or perhaps you could do it like you say, Lucy, at the beginning, or should we just have a few minutes catching up with what's been going on in the world before we start using the therapy apps, or you might use it as a break. So I think it is a really good resource. I'd encourage you to kind of get familiar with that, and if it works, build it into your sessions with the people that you're working with. Yeah, lovely. Thanks, Lucy. Rachel.
Told in the induction that Zoom apparently has a whiteboard function, though I haven't used it, so I suppose you could use that for drawing.
Yes.
Writing. It also has a chat function, which might be useful for keeping track of conversation and summarising.
Yeah. I feel that I'm not very familiar. Well, I'm not familiar with the whiteboard function, because otherwise it would be a useful thing to be using today. So forgive me that I haven't got up to speed with that on so many different platforms that I have to use. But yeah, I imagine that whiteboard function might be more useful than the chat, which just feels that's quite demanding for people with aphasia. I'm now seeing that there is something in the chat, but I think that must be from ages ago. Yeah, it is. It's from the start. Okay, so yes, but I think you're right that making use of the the facilities on whatever platform you're using is a really helpful way to go. Thank you, Rachel. Yeah. I don't think that we've heard from Paranat.
We use like some short video clip to be like group conversation starter. It doesn't have to be like very complicated video. I mean, cat video or something like that to initiate the conversation.
Lovely, thanks, Perina. Yeah, I really like that idea. Yeah. So yeah, you might well be able to find things that relate to people's hobbies and interests, or a clip of something that's happened to somebody, a celebrity that they've mentioned, or yeah, there's all sorts of possibilities for that, and sharing that sounds like a really nice idea. Yeah, so keeping an eye to things that might appeal, and that really feed into what you know about the person that you're visiting. Yeah, that's great. Or the person that you're supporting. Yeah. And a W.
I don't really have anything new to say, but I guess the obvious one would be the therapy apps. So actually having something that you can work through the activities and things like that.
Yeah, lovely. Yes. So, and that's really helpful to say, Anna, because that is, um, you've kind of got a dual focus to your visits or sessions, and you are that that's the understanding. That's what the person with aphasia is signed up to do. So, yeah. And things might well emerge out of that, mightn't it? And it's having the confidence if you're working through a therapy app and then it triggers somebody wanting to tell you a story about their dog because they've seen something that links in their head, then you're able to kind of take a little step back from it and say, oh, what happened then? And then support that that conversation as it takes place. Yeah, great. Okay, there are lots of other things that you might want to kind of use or bring or think of. So can anyone, I'll open it up again. Any other suggestions? Rachel, you've turned your mic.
Could you use Romeo X Talk?
Oh, I'm really sorry, I'm struggling to hear you. Can you say that again?
I just thought about using objects in the room. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that might work on Zoom as well if you can see something behind the person. Just as a topic to talk about as an icebreaker.
Yeah, people quite often have family photos, don't they, or other things that are yeah. So that's a good option, kind of making use of of what people have got in their home. A really good way of getting to know people and sort of finding out about their friends and family. Great. Any other suggestions? Let me share. Well, actually, I wonder whether this might be quite a good window to have a break. So it's near 5 to 11 nearly. So if we reconvene, if you want to go and put the kettle on, let's reconvene at 11, and then we can kind of do a little bit more thinking and reflecting about these sorts of resources and how you might support. Is that all right? Lovely. See you shortly. So I'm not a great fan of the of animations on Zoom, but I have put a few of these in, which is why I was smiling when someone mentioned pen and paper earlier, because that is really key. I probably need to change these, don't I, now that some of your contact isn't going to be face-to-face. But yeah, some shared way of using pen and paper or an equivalent is just the single most useful supported conversation resource that you can have. And we'll think a bit more about other resources in the next few minutes, but you could end up thinking that you needed a sort of small wheeled suitcase of resources, and that's not the case at all. And often pen and paper is the single most important thing. So I really want to emphasise that, and that's just a really useful shared resource, however you do that, physically or virtually. Okay. So I want to kind of talk through this wheel, some of which you've come up with already, and some of which we'll discuss a little bit more. So let's work through this from 12 o'clock. So I think maps can be really useful, and again, this is something that's really easy for you to share on screen, but place names and proper names are things that are readily confusable for people, So sometimes it can be really difficult for people to tell you where they've been, or where they used to live, or where their family members live, or where they like to go on holiday, and those sorts of things. So having access to a map of the area, a map of the UK, a map of the world, or whatever, those things can just be really, really helpful. So I'm thinking of somebody that I've got some students visiting at the moment who makes really, really good use of Google Maps. And is good at homing in, telling his conversation partners where he's been, kind of walking them through a route that he's taken to get to the library or the shops or whatever, and pointing things out. So that can just be a really valuable resource. So bear that in mind. Has anyone come across the My Stroke Guide produced by the Stroke Association? So this will be useful with some people and not so useful with others, but it's a resource that the Stroke Association have set up a couple of years ago, and it's just got lots of information about stroke, about aphasia. It's got a kind of chat room function for people to kind of share their own experience. It's got lots of kind of useful videos on a whole range of different topics. So that might be something that if something crops up, I don't know, that somebody's got some visual problems and you kind of want to sort of understand those a bit more, or they want to discuss them with you, that might be a good sort of starting point. So bear it in mind. You need to probably create your own username and login to kind of get familiar with it. But that might be something that would be worth having a look at. So I'm just going to move my... Okay. And then, just as I was saying that place names, proper names, can be readily confusable, that's the same is true with kind of days of the week, months of the year, this week, last week. Those sorts of things can be readily confusable. So it can really help to make use of calendars, or even just to kind of write the days of the week down, on the shared whiteboard or on pen and paper, so that you can kind of clarify when something happened that someone's telling you about, or when something is going to happen, a family wedding or whatever. So just making use of calendars and diaries and those sorts of things can just really sort of situate things that are otherwise just quite difficult to pin down. And then I think maybe it was Rachel who was talking about objects in the room, and we talked about making use of photos. And yeah, that does really help. That can be a really useful resource, and making use of and that might be something that you wanted to share as well. If you're having a bit of a catch up at the start of the session, I've got one or two patients who go out and about with their iPads and who just take pictures. One who hilariously just takes pictures wherever he goes, and told me a few weeks ago that he'd been to the dry cleaners, and he just snapped the poor people behind the counter so that he could tell me that he'd been. So not many people do anything quite like that, but sometimes people will have photos of what they've been up to that they might want to share, or you might feel comfortable to sort of say, oh, I went to the beach at the weekend, or I went to wherever, and just share a couple of pictures. So that can just be a really nice way of catching up. I've put postcards in because sometimes, particularly slightly older generations, have still got a bit of a kind of postcard tradition, and will. I'm thinking of my own in-laws used to have. Lots of people sent them postcards from where they'd been, and they would have those stuck up in their kitchen, and they were quite a good kind of talking point. Okay, the things. Talking mats. Has anyone heard of talking mats? Did this crop up? No. Okay, that's fine. So let's spend a bit more time thinking about this. And actually, I'll probably stop talking myself so that you've got. I'll share a little bit of video. Talking mats is does actually involve a mat. So a very sort of concrete, visual means of using picture material on a physical mat, so stuck with Velcro. So very kind of concrete, very visual, but are often a really sort of useful resource. And we use different sorts of talking mat resources for all sorts of things within Sheffield Teaching Hospitals. So we use it to help people think about how or whether they can manage when they're discharged from hospital post-stroke, and we would use a talking mat and pictures that have got things like, do you need, help with shopping, with washing and dressing, with cooking, with cleaning, so we'd have icons, pictures for all of those, and then we would be able to use that as a way of helping people think through, is that something they can do independently, or is that something they need help with? And so we've got a way of kind of very visually mapping and helping someone think through what they can do post-discharge. So obviously that's not something that you would be discussing, but I use that as an example because it's just it's a tool that you can use across all sorts of different contexts. I use it to get feedback when somebody's had a block of supported conversation visits, for them to feed back to me of what were the things that they found difficult, what were the things that they enjoyed. So I've got a set of pictures that are specific to that. And what I'm suggesting for you is that you might use, and I'll share this with you in a moment, a set of pictures that are to do with people's hobbies and interests, so that you can find out a bit more about what they're interested in and they like. The video though that I'll share with you is a video of somebody using talking mats to talk about goal setting with a patient. So we'll just have a look at this together, and then it'll give you a little bit of a flavour of what I mean. So I'll stop sharing this. Okay, let me know that if you can hear it, and just shout up if it's not working.
Discuss his
Again, sorry.
The next clip shows Ian using talking mats to discuss his rehabilitation goals. Using the main topic symbols, he is much more in control of the conversation and is more able to elaborate about the areas he wants to work on.
Right, so what I'm going to do this time, Ian, is we're going to use something called talking mats to help you think about the goals you want to work with the rehab team. So what I'm going to put along the top, first of all, I've got lots of symbols here. On this side, I'm going to put, this would be for things that you're managing, that you're coping with and you're managing well. This would be things you're maybe not sure about, and this is the things that you're having difficulty with, that you maybe want help with. Okay, so I've got a few symbols here. These are kind of the general, these are sort of general topics, and they're in no particular order. Okay, so first of all, what do you feel about your spare time, doing things in your spare time? Okay, so is that something you're having difficulty with? You're needing more things to do? Okay. What about domestic things like cooking, shopping, housework? You're managing that okay? Okay. Do you do a lot of housework?
No.
Okay. This is about work and education. What do you feel about work or further education, going to college?
Yeah.
You managing that okay? You're kind of not sure. Are you thinking about what?
Computers.
Computers at college? Or are you thinking about actually getting a job to do with computers?
See how it goes.
Okay. Yeah. Because you already know quite a bit. I mean, you're pretty good with computers already, are you not?
I don't know.
I think you are. It looks like you are. Okay, so that's something you're thinking about.
Yeah.
How about mobility? Just getting around?
No.
Okay, so you're needing help with
Yeah.
that, with walking?
Yeah. Walking, arm.
Your arm?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it pain? Have you got a lot of pain in your
No,
arm?
numb.
It's numb,
Yeah.
right? And you can't really use it.
Yeah.
Is that right? Okay.
Okay, I'm going to stop there. But I think that gives a bit of a flavour. So very low tech. And obviously that's going to be something. There is a kind of electronic version of that. So that might be something that you want to kind of consider and explore. But often its appeal is actually that it's so sort of visual and physical and tactile, so really concrete. So it might be something that you want to kind of reserve to bear in mind if you are seeing somebody in person. And Speak with IT have got some resources, and they're similar to the resources that I'm just going to share with you now, which we have and use when we're helping people discuss their hobbies and interests. So instead of the icons that you saw the therapist on the video using, which are a thumbs up and a thumbs down and this sort of icon, we just use smiley faces for hobbies and interests. So, you know, is this something you like doing, or this so-so, or no, I'd rather not do any of these. So again, I'll just share my screen. And you can kind of get a bit of a sense of the resources. So obviously these are in a Word document, but they would be cut out, and we keep sets that are laminated and have Velcro on the back of them so that we can use them with a mat. But equally, you can just have bits of paper and use a bit of Prit. But you could see Ian in the video sort of changing his mind and picking something off and putting it somewhere else. And there is something, because it's so concrete and so visual, that's quite helpful about people being able to look at what they've produced on the mat and then actually say, oh no, that's not what I meant, and move it to a different so that it's under a different section. So I'll just scroll through these, so just to give you a bit of a flavour of so it covers a fairly wide variety of people's hobbies and interests. Okay, so does that give you a bit of a flavour, and have you got a sense of what I'm suggesting as another possible resource? Great. Okay. So two things to say about that. One is that James wanted me to make it clear that if you wanted those resources, Speak with IT have got them. So do just get back in touch with James or others if you want to access any of those. And secondly, quite often students and volunteers who I've worked with have made use of this resource, and then they've kind of developed other resources that have come out of it. So for the best example of this is quite a few years ago now, where some students that I was working with did an EastEnders talking mat, and they had everybody from the cast of EastEnders on a separate picture, and then they spent a delightful 2 sessions, I think, just kind of talking about EastEnders, and with the person with aphasia kind of putting the character under, you know, can't be doing with him, or, you know, I really like her, or whatever. So it's a very kind of flexible resource to talk about almost anything. So do bear that in mind. You know, if somebody's got an interest in films, or or different sports or whatever, then you could do a talking mat about, you know, any of those sorts of things. So bear that in mind. Again, it may or may not be something that you use because your focus is around the use of therapy apps, but it may be that you know, it forms a kind of good way of practicing and supporting conversation, using vocabulary that you've trained in particular apps. So you know, there's sort of potential for some nice generalization or crossover or whatever. So that's it's something to bear in mind. Does that all make sense? Lovely, grand, thank you. I'll just go back to my slides. Sorry folks, bear with me. Oh. Folks, I'm really sorry, the tech is really playing up. Right, let's give this a go. There, are you getting that on full screen? Lovely, okay, great. So we talked about talking maths. Occasionally, alphabet boards and things like that can be quite useful. So let me just scroll through a few more slides and show you what I mean. So that's my stroke guide front page. We've talked about talking maths. So, I mean, I would be happy with people just writing out an alphabet board if that was useful, or having something like this on screen. I think you're going to struggle with that online completely. But sometimes it's just a helpful resource, because if people aren't able to spell or write a full word, they might sometimes be able to identify a couple of letters. So it's just another useful thing to bear in mind. Let's move on to talk about communication books. So sometimes people call these personal portfolios, communication passports, communication files. Did this come up at all last week in this Speak with IT training? Looks like not. That's fine. So I think these have kind of twofold uses really. So quite often people with aphasia will have a personal portfolio or a communication book that a speech and language therapist has helped them produce, but not always. If they do have it, can be a really useful resource for you to get to know them and to use as a basis for supported conversation. I've got one, and I'll show you it online as well. But this, I've got this sort of size, which is in a photo album, which is what I would use, you know, largely what I would create for someone with aphasia. That's easy to kind of to open up. But I also have one that's A4 size that I use for kind of demonstration purposes, and that's the one that I'll show you in a moment on screen. So let me just open it. So this is mine. Okay, have you got that on full screen again? Lovely, thank you. So this is just an example, and I'll rattle through it. You don't need to know a lot about me. But I'm showing you this partly so that you're kind of familiar with what the sort of thing that someone you're seeing might have. And they might have a physical version. Some people are starting to prefer to have a version that's electronic, so something that they have on their phone or on a tablet. So they just might have this sort of information somewhere, and that would be worth checking out. But also, I'd really recommend that you consider creating something like this about yourself, because this is a really nice, accessible, aphasia-friendly way of introducing yourself to someone with aphasia. And you can put as much or as little information in it as you want, but I think that it can be a real help. So mine's just got a bit of information about me. The ones that I produce for other people have got more sort of photo information in it, but I've just put a few things in. So it's got information about my family, about my job, and even if people are retired, it can be really nice to, our working life is a big part of our identity. So, if people are retired, they might still want to have some information in there about what they used to do. And then important places to me. And my hobbies and interests. Things I read. Things I watch. So that sort of thing is what I'm suggesting that, and occasionally, although I don't think this is really the focus for Speak with IT volunteers, but occasionally this can be something that you might help someone develop. So that's something else to bear in mind. Has anyone got any sort of comments or questions about those things? Great, okay, that's all good. Okay. Okay, so we've talked about communication books. I've talked about let me just take you back to this. Okay, so we're working around this clock. Magazines and brochures, again, just a really helpful thing. I've specialist magazines that sometimes people get or that you might consider buying. It's amazing what specialist magazines you can get. I found out more than I ever needed to know about coarse fishing by reading a specialist magazine about that. So that can be really helpful. And then you might want to think about doing kind of non-speech things as a bit of a break, so dominoes or Connect 4 or those sorts of things, obviously not Scrabble. We've talked about the internet and that what a useful resource Google is and how much you can gather from that. And reference books, I think, can be really helpful. So the sorts of big sort of coffee table books without much text can be a really helpful resource. So I would be thinking about, if you are visiting someone in person and finding out about their interests, going to the local library and getting kind of large books that have got quite, that are quite visual. And then we've also talked about Words of the Week already. So again, that's a really useful resource. So those are the things that I'm suggesting to you as resources to support conversation. But primarily, and I think all of these might well be useful to you, so bear some or all of them in mind at different times during the time that you spend working with the person that you're supporting. But bear in mind that pen and paper or an equivalent is going to be the single most useful resource, and that actually the way that you alter your communication is much more important than all of these things. That's going to be something that really does support your interaction. So don't get sidetracked into thinking too much about resources, because a lot of it resides with you rather than with what you're bringing, the resources that you're bringing to the session. Does that make sense? Great, okay. Let me just rattle through these. Okay, before we get onto those questions, I'll stop sharing again for a moment. The final thing that I want to do, and I think that probably means that we'll finish a bit early, but that's fine, is show you another video of kind of how not to do supportive conversation. So I'll just swap to a different video and then we'll look at that together. It's just a short clip of of someone making a real hash of supported conversation. And I think there's a lot to learn from that, really. So what we'll do is look at it together and then discuss it briefly. Is that all right? Just take a moment to load. Here we are.
What have you been up to? Been watching any television?
Paints?
No, you've been drawing some things. You've been painting. Oh, you've been painting. That's lovely. Oh, no, it must be so good to be able to paint, because I suppose if you're painting, you don't miss not being able to talk. And
Paints.
so you've been painting circles.
No,
painting circles, going round and round.
Yes.
No, I'm not quite sure what you're doing. You've been driving.
No.
You've been driving. You've been out driving with your wife.
No.
You haven't been out driving. But I bet it's nice to go out and see the countryside and take in some of the air, because you're driving around. You've been driving around. No. So anyway, you probably don't watch much television, I wouldn't have thought. It must be hard to take it in.
Yes,
because it's hard to take it in. Yes, I know. No, it's not hard to take in. No. Oh, it must be very confusing. Yes, perhaps I'll ask your wife when she comes in. I'll ask her if you've been watching television. How about that? Because I mean, it's difficult for you to say, isn't it? And yes, it's not. Yes, going round in circles and round, going round and catching something like that very quickly.
No.
I'm not quite. I tell you what. Why don't we wait and ask your wife?
Yes,
that'll be much better, won't it? Yes, that's lovely. Okay. Well, anyway, it's lovely talking to you, because then you're looking so well. I mean, I think you've done so well since your stroke. It's really fantastic to see.
That's a bit excruciating, isn't it? So I'm sure you won't be doing any of that, but I think it is good learning to think, right, what was she doing wrong, so that you know not to do that sort of thing. So any thoughts on what you're not going to do?
It felt like she was being very patronising, especially with the pattern towards the end. Yeah,
I think you're right. I think that's a good adjective, isn't it? Yeah, so she did seem to be very patronising, and she was very much in his space, wasn't she, when she was touching him? Which is a sort of separate but connected thing. You're right. Yes, thank you, Anna. Rachel.
She was interrupting him all the time, wasn't she? She wasn't giving him time to say what he wanted to say.
Yes, thank you. I'm just turning you up, Rachel. I can't hear very well. Yes, absolutely. She didn't give him any space at all, did she? Yeah. Talking over him, not listening, interrupting. Yeah, thank you.
She kind of also took away a little bit of his independence by saying over and over, "I'll just ask your wife because you can't do it," sort of thing. It's hard for you to say, so I'll just ask your wife.
Yeah, thank you, Kath. It's kind of the opposite of revealing competence, isn't it? She's not facilitating that at all. Yeah.
She made a lot of assumptions as well. So she sort of said, "Oh, it must be like this," but he hadn't actually given a full answer, and she just sort of made up what she thought he had said without. And he was even saying no, and she completely kind of ignored that as well.
This was all done for the camera, I just want you to know, because Carol Pandy is actually a really skilled speech and language therapist. But yes, absolutely, there was lots of that going on, wasn't there? And that kind of relates back to what we were talking about earlier, that I mean, it's a slightly different thing, but that it's just always an error to kind of not say if you've not understood. So she was just kind of putting on her own kind of frame of reference over his, wasn't she? But yeah, not giving him any space. Yeah. Okay. Any other things that you're not going to do?
She seemed to do a really sudden change of topic. So she started talking about the television, didn't she? When that hadn't been the topic previously.
Yeah, and that's really helpful, Rachel, as well. Yeah, and I think if there is a change of topic, it's really good to mark that, isn't there? And we do that without having any language problems, don't we? We're aware that if we're just kind of going, we sometimes say, oh, I know, this is a non sequitur, or I know, we've been talking, you mark that anyway. And it's much more important to do that if that's happening with someone with aphasia, to just say, is it okay if we move on to talk about, or shall we think about this now, or other things that are negotiated. Yeah. Great. Any other comments?
I guess just what we were saying before about the volume levels, she was sort of shouting over him, in that he didn't even have a chance to butt in at any point.
Yeah. So she had the floor, didn't she? She was just, thank you, Anna. That's really helpful. Yeah. Great. Any other comments?
I mean, she asks questions, but she doesn't wait for him to respond, and she just keep bringing up the new topic, and like she make him he feel like he's a incompetent speaker in a way.
Yeah, thank you, Parana. Yeah, and that's absolutely the opposite of what you'll be doing, I'm sure. Because and so I like the way that you phrase that. She made him feel like he wasn't a competent speaker, and what we're engaged with is revealing people's competence and increasing their competence via the kind of therapeutic nature of supported conversation and via improving their language directly with the apps. So yeah, it's really sort of counterintuitive, isn't it, to what what your sessions are about. Yeah. Empty table as well. So no resources at all, no pen and paper, nothing that's going to support conversation. In that space at all. Yeah. Okay. I hope that's helpful. I think it can be quite memorable as a sort of what not to do exercise, so I quite like including that. We're doing really well, but I think unless people have got any kind of particular questions or anything else that they want to say or ask, we might pause there or stop there. So I'll stay on the call, and then if anybody wants to speak to me or has got anything that they want to raise, then I'll be here for a couple of minutes. But I think otherwise we're done. Does anyone want to say anything while we're in a group together? Anna.
Sorry, I just was going to check. Did you say that the slides will get sent out?
Yes, I'll send a PDF to James so he can circulate those. Yeah, I'll definitely do that.
And will the recording still be sent to us even though we've been here as well?
I don't know the answer to that, but I think so. And certainly you can request it, so that will be fine. Yeah. Thanks, Anna.
Thank you.
Other? Is that all right? Thank you all. That's been great. That's really good. So I wish you all well with your volunteering. It's great that you're giving up your time and giving your sort of thought and energy to this, and I'm sure it'll be really appreciated. Okay, so nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny.